Good morning, Troop 789. Actually, it's not morning. It's probably evening for you. It's morning for me as I make this video and introduce myself to you. My name is Douglas Weller, and I am an intermediate arts teacher at Creekview Intermediate School. I teach art for 5th and 6th graders, and I'm sure many of you will eventually be a student at Creekview where I will teach you art. Aside from being an art teacher, I'm also an artist, and the type of art that I really enjoy is cartooning. How many of you guys like to do cartooning? Hopefully some of you are raising your hands. I've always loved comic books and cartoons from way back. I think that my whole journey into cartooning started when I was in 2nd grade, and my mom bought me some comic books, and I instantly fell in love with the way the stories were written, and especially the way the images were drawn. And when I was very, very young, again, 2nd grade, I began drawing pictures that I saw from comic books. And that slowly transitioned into a life of cartooning for me. Eventually, I stopped drawing superheroes from comic books, and I started creating my own superheroes, and eventually I fell in love with comic strips and cartooning, which led me into creating my own cartoons and comic strips, which is what I'm still doing today. And I actually have some examples to show you of a graphic novel that I'm in the process of actually writing and drawing and putting together. So let's look at a few of my stuff, and then we'll get into a lesson about drawing comics. My first true venture into cartooning was when I was a student at The Ohio State University. There was a free daily newspaper there called The Lantern. And inside The Lantern there was a comics page with about 4 or 5 different comic strips. When I talk about comic strips and newspapers, we're talking about things like Charlie Brown and Foxtrot and Calvin and Hobbes, maybe some that you've heard of. And the comic strips in The Lantern were like, they were drawn really well, but they were all just making fun of each other. They were kind of vulgar, and I didn't really think that they did justice to the history of cartooning. So I sat down and I came up with some characters based on myself and my wife and my best friend. And my first comics were called I Dig Doug. And this is a picture of me and my best friend Matt and my wife Carrie. Of course, these characters at the time were just 3 college students. And they do a whole bunch of crazy, ridiculous things. So like I said, I Dig Doug was, and this is actually a comic book I did of my I Dig Doug characters. And it's basically just a ridiculous story full of pop culture references. And I Dig Doug was something that I did for about 10 years. I first started getting published in the Ohio State newspaper in 1999. My comics were published in The Lantern until 2001. At 2001, I was no longer at OSU. I did some student teaching, became an art teacher, and I kind of put I Dig Doug on the shelf for a while. It wasn't anything that, it's not that I fell out of love with cartooning, it's just that I was ready for something different. And that's when I created Lost on Earth. Lost on Earth is the story about these 3 characters right here, and I know there's a little bit of a glare, but I think you'll be able to see it okay. This is Alan Android, Dr. Squid, and Fishtar, and these 3 really goofy, funny characters eventually make their way to Earth and get stuck here, really. But that's not the real reason why it's called Lost on Earth. But I don't want to give too much of the story away because, as I said, it is a graphic novel that I'm currently working on. So if we look at, if we stop really focusing on just my work and we just look at the pages as I flip them, one of the things that you should particularly notice about storytelling in a comic or graphic novel is that there are a series of panels. And the panels kind of read left to right, top to bottom. And so the idea of creating comics or creating graphic novels is really about storytelling and how best to present your story. The writing portion of it is just as important as the actual art itself. So in here, this page actually has very few words, which makes it even more of a challenge, because now you're actually reading a comic without really reading any words. So cartooning and telling stories in comic form are definitely challenging, but it's so fun. And I'm going to break down the entire process for you so that you get a chance to do a little cartooning yourself. Last week we created some characters. So last week I believe I created Mr. Toast and Butter Buddy. Okay, so let's go first through writing a story and doing a little editing. The first thing I'd like you to do is create a character list. These are all of the possible characters that could be appearing in your comic strip. And so for me, it's Mr. Toast and Butter Buddy. Just because these characters are in your character list, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be in your comic. It just means that they are available for you to use. Okay? Then you're going to write a story. To write an effective story, remember you want to keep it simple. So for example, my story goes like this. Mr. Toast, and I'm just going to abbreviate as Mr. T because I don't really need to write the entire thing because it's just for me. Mr. T pops out of a toaster. I mean, he's toast, right? That's where he would be popping out from. Mr. T, when he pops out of the toaster, says, "Whee!" Okay? Butter Buddy, and I'll put in parentheses, sees Mr. T flying through the air, and Butter Buddy says, "I'll catch you, my toasty friend." Remember, we're trying to make it kind of funny. And Mr. T says, "No, look out." Then Butter Buddy tries to catch Mr. T, and then we're going to have some onomatopoeia, plop, and Mr. T says, "Ouch." Okay? So I've just written a very simple, yet not very funny. It's kind of funny. It's just a little story. Remember that your comic must be anywhere between 2 to 4 panels in length. So after you've written the story, the next thing you have to do is you have to panel it out. You want to panel it out to see how many panels you actually have. So in this instance, Mr. T pops out of the toaster. I want that to be panel number 1, and I'm going to label it panel 1. As he's flying through the air saying "wee," I want that to be panel 2. Butter Buddy, who sees Mr. Toast flying in the air, that's going to be panel 3. Mr. T yells back at Butter Buddy, "No, look out." That's panel 4. Butter Buddy tries to catch Mr. T, is panel 5. Plop is panel 6. And Mr. T saying "ouch" is panel 7. Holy mackerel, I've got way too much going on in my story. This happens a lot, okay? It happens quite a bit, and it's okay if it happened. You just have to know how to edit it. Now, the first way to edit things is to see if there are panels that you can combine. In this instance, I could combine panel 1 and 2. As he's popping out of the toaster, I can make him say "whee." So that could be one panel all by itself. I could also combine Butter Buddy trying to catch Mr. T with the word "plop." So that would combine panels 5 and 6. If I do that, I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels. Still too much. So if doing that doesn't work, the next step is doing some rewriting. Okay?
Remember earlier I said just because the characters are in your character list doesn't mean you have to use them. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So right now in this example, I'm thinking, I don't think any of this is going to work. Butter Buddy just isn't going to make the cut for this comic. Okay? So if I just edit by crossing some things out, what have I got left? Panel 1, Mr. T pops out of the toaster. Whee! Panel 2. Panel 6 now becomes panel 3, plop, but I'm going to change that to say crunch. Whoops. And then my new, and I'll write over here, my new panel 4 is going to be Mr. Toast saying, ouch, I think I broke my crust. Ha ha! I think I can't write while I'm talking on a video. I think I broke my crust. Isn't that funny? Of course, what would a toast wouldn't break his arm, he'd break his crust. Okay, so now I started with something that was way too much. I edited it down to something that's much more manageable. Now when you're done writing the story, now you have to go on to storyboarding. Storyboarding is a lot simpler, won't take as long. Let me show you. So in an effort to create a storyboard, there's really not much to it. Please remember that a storyboard is a quick sketch. It is not your final copy. You are just basically outlining a rough draft of what your comic would look like. So for example, my comic is now 4 panels long. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw those 4 panels. I'm really not worried about a ruler. I'm not worried about perfectly straight lines, but do you see how I have this white space in between all my panels? It's important that you do that. That way you can very easily read your comic from left to right. So panel 1, Mr. T pops out of a toaster. So I'm going to draw a toaster. It's sitting on a counter. There's the line. I'm going to draw some action lines. And here is Mr. T popping out. In the second panel, I have some dialogue, and it's we. It's important that if you have dialogue or words, you write that first. Okay? So here's we, and he's screaming it because he's having so much fun. So again, now here's Mr. Toast flying through the air. His eyes are closed. He's got a great big smile on his face. He's having lots of fun flying through the air. Suddenly, we'll have the word plop. Okay? Now, it's probably not the best example of the word plop, but it works because, again, it's just a storyboard. And then I'm going to have Mr. Toast. This is a little trickier to draw. He's now laying on the counter with his crust. And maybe I've got some lines here, like maybe the counter's broken. It's like he really, really hit. And what did I do wrong in this one? Do you remember? Who remembers? You don't remember. It doesn't matter if you're raising your hand. I can't see you anyway. Remember, you're supposed to add the words first. So in this example, plop. Oh, and I didn't want plop anymore, didn't I? I wanted crunch. See? I'm making all kinds of goofy mistakes. Crunch. Ouch. I think I broke my crust. Oh, poor Mr. Toast. Okay, word balloon. And that's it. That's a storyboard. Once you have the storyboard written, now you at least kind of know what each panel should look like when you do your final copy, which is super important, okay? Because you want your final copy to look as best as you possibly can. If you make little mistakes on your storyboarding, like I did here and here, now you know what you have to do to fix that when you do your final draft, which is why storyboarding is so important, okay? So, real quick, take the characters you created last week, write and edit a simple, nice little story, do some storyboarding. Once you're finished with your storyboards, you can go onto a new sheet of paper. This happens to be a actual professional daily comic strip Bristol board. which you probably do not have, but any piece of paper will be absolutely fine. And you can see that I've taken the storyboard that you just saw in the video and I've transitioned it into final drafts. So here is Mr. Toast popping out of the toaster. Here he is saying, woohoo! So that changed just a little bit. Here is my onomatopoeia crunch, and I actually have inked this final panel. Ouch, I think I broke my crust. So the idea in a final draft is to, just like you did in your storyboard, draw your panels, then lightly sketch with a pencil, and then go back in with I use a particular kind of inking pen, but a black Sharpie or any pen or marker will work, and just inking it out until it's a final copy. And that's pretty much the same process when, oops, sorry, I just dropped something, when I draw my graphic novel. All of this stuff was done in blue pencil, and then after the blue pencil was done, you go back in with ink. Ta-da!
And there you have it, everything you need to know about creating comics. Now, I suppose you're going to want to take some time to write and draw your very own cartoons. Remember, story is important, and if you get stuck writing a story, just think of some of the funny things that happen to you each day at school or at home or wherever it is that you go, and just take that story and twist it a little bit and replace you and whoever else was in that story with the characters that you created. That's what I did. Did that all the time. So, have fun. Good luck. It was great talking to you, even if it is via YouTube. Best of luck to you in all of your cartooning travels, and I'm sure I will see you eventually.